we are going to talk about how we can secure the data access in Microsoft Fabric. Microsoft Fabric actually uses a multi-layer security model with access controls at different levels, we can say. That is what Microsoft Fabric uses. So if I talk about the security part of Microsoft Fabric, it is optimized for securing the data for specific use cases. Like different users need the ability to perform various actions in Fabric so that it can fulfill their job responsibilities. We may have Fabric which facilitates this by allowing us to grant users to access a specific data workload. That can be done through the workspace and the item permissions, or through the compute permissions we can do it. And we also have one leg data access roles which is still in a preview mode. We can use those ways also to secure the data access. Now, after the overview, let's proceed further about what topics we have. The very first thing which we need to understand is the Fabric's security model. We have to understand about the Fabric security model. Now, whatever data access is there in the organizations, it is often restricted by users' responsibilities, we can say. It is often restricted by the roles and by an organization's Fabric deployment patterns, and also based on the data's architecture at times. So Fabric has got a flexible multi-layer security model, which will allow us to configure the security to accommodate different data access requirements. It has got the ability to control the permissions at different layers, which means that you can actually adhere to the principle of least privilege. You can restrict the user's permission to only what is needed to perform the job task, we can say. So this is basically how the Fabric security model is done. Now we have a sequential access evaluation within the Fabric's environment, which means that if we go inside the Fabric security model, there is a step-by-step access evaluation which is done. You can think of it just like you are passing through 3 different gates, one after the other. So in this case, if a user fails at any gate, then the access is denied. So same is the concept over here. So the very first evaluation happens as the Microsoft Entra ID's authentication, which we can consider as a gate 1. What it does is, it will check if the user is who they claim to be. If you say I am this person, it will check if you are that same person or no. So it will check if the user can authenticate to the Azure identity and the access management service, Microsoft Entra ID, these things it will check. If no identity, it is equal to no entry. This is your first line of defense. Just like how we scan our ID badge to enter the office building, it is just like that, we can say. A simple example. This is what Microsoft Entra ID authentication checks. Now, second level of sequential access evaluation is done at the Fabric access level. Now, when I talk about Fabric access level, we can say that this is the gate 2 which we have. What it does is, it will confirm if the user has permission to access the Microsoft Fabric itself or no. Which means, why does this access matters is, even if you are a valid user, you still need the right role or the license to interact with Fabric. So that is what the Fabric access checks. It checks if the user can access the Fabric or no. Just because you entered the office building doesn't mean that you can access the server room or anything. You need some special clearance or special permissions to do that. That is kind of a Fabric access which we have. Then we have the third layer of security, which is the data security. Data security means it evaluates whether the user has the permissions to perform some actions like read or write or delete on specific data assets, might be like the files or might be the tables. So this is kind of a more granular control which ensures users only do what they are authorized to do. That is what the data security does. It is just like, even if you are in the server room, you might not be allowed to touch every server. That kind of an security is basically what the data security is all about. So if I talk about the data security, it has several building blocks which can be configured individually, or we can configure it together also to align with different access requirements. So we have like workspace rules, which is part of the data security. Item permissions are there. Compute or granular permissions are there. One-leg data access controls are there. So all these basically are the primary access controls in the fabric, we can say. Now, this is basically how the data security design looks like. It is very helpful to envision these building blocks in a hierarchy so that we understand how these access controls can be applied individually or together also. So I'm going to tell you what are these workspace roles, item permissions, what are these compute permissions. These things I'm going to discuss one by one with you. So when I talk about this data security designs, we have got some workspace rules. What it is? These are basically the high level roles which is assigned within a Fabric workspace. Now, why does it matter? We have workspace roles like admin, member, contributor, or viewer who defines who can do what at the project level. That is a workspace role. Just imagine, just a use case, I would say, an admin can manage all assets and the permissions, while a viewer can only see the reports or the data. Think of this as your team's organizational access. Who's allowed to do what within a collaborative workspace? Think of this workspace role just like that. Then we have the item permissions, which is the next level of the permission. Item permission means these are the permissions at the asset level. Asset level like permission for a specific lake house, permission for a specific warehouse, or permission for a specific semantic model. That is kind of an item level permissions, we can say. So this is basically where we can enable role-based access control. It can be enforced at the individual data set also, or at the model level also we can implement it. Then we have the compute or granular permissions. Compute or granular permission means these are the engine level permissions, which is often scoped to actions like read or write or execute or view schema, these things. So it gives more fine-tuned control over what users can do with the compute engines. Like for example, executing a query versus modifying a table. So this is basically what the compute or the granular permissions provide us with. This aligns with the principle of least privilege, and it grants only the necessary access, we can say. That is what the compute or the permission levels are going to do. We can say that these permissions, granular or compute permissions, it is basically specific for compute engines in the fabric, like it is specific for an SQL endpoint or the semantic models. Then we have the one-leg data access controls. The fabric data items which store their data in one leg. The access to the data in the lakehouse can be restricted to some specific files or folders using the RBAC feature, which is called as one-leg data access control, and this feature is in a preview mode. Now, why does this matter? One leg actually supports us with the centralized governance over distributed data. So this will ensure that consistent security policies regardless of the data domain or the tool. So these are basically the data security designs which we have. These are the different security designs which exist. Now we need to understand about the workspace rules. We want to talk about what are these different workspace rules which we have. What are the workspace and the item permission rules which we have. So if I talk about the workspace rules specifically, suppose if you're working at a healthcare company as the Fabric security admin, you need to set up access for a new data engineer. Now the data engineer needs the ability to do only two things. First thing is he should be able to create some Fabric items in an existing workspace. And secondly, he should be able to read all the data in an existing lakehouse that's in the same workspace where they can create the Fabric item. This is an example. Now, workspace roles will control what the users can do and access within a Fabric workspace. For that, we have this workspace roles with us. We have four workspace roles and they apply to all the items within a workspace. Workspace roles can be assigned to individuals also. We can assign it to the security groups also, or to the Microsoft 365 groups also, or to the distribution list also we can assign it. So users can be assigned to these roles. The very first role is of an admin. Admin means they can view, they can modify, they can share, they can manage all the content and data in the workspace, and they can even manage the permissions. If I am the admin of my workspace, I can add another person as an admin. I can do all these things. I can manage the permissions. I can view the content which is there in the workspace. I can view modify the data which is there. I can share it. I can manage all these things. So as an admin, it is just like you get all the access, we can say in simple words. You have the full control over the workspace, and whatever is there within the workspace, you have the full control of it. That is basically an admin role. Then we have a member role with us. So member role says that they can actually view, modify, and share all content and data in the workspace, which means they can also view the data, they can also modify the data, and they can also share all the content and data in the workspace. But they won't be able to manage any permissions specifically. This is what a member can do. So member is kind of a high level permission itself, but it does not have full administrative rights, we can say. This is basically what a member role is all about. Then we have the contributor role with us. Now, what is this contributor role? They can actually view and they can modify all content and data in the workspace. That is what a contributor can do. So contributor means they are only focused on the content creation and the contribution part. That is what they mostly do. They can view it, they can modify it, all the content, but they cannot share the data or anything. They can't share it with anyone else. Those access the contributor won't be having. In simple words, they can't modify any other items. They can't manage the users or the settings. Nothing they can do. They can just edit the items they have created. They can create new items. These things they can do. Then the last role which we have is a viewer role. So when I talk about this viewer role, they can view all the content and the data in the workspace, but they can't modify it. This is what a viewer role can do. Now, I gave you an example of a healthcare company where we are working as a Fabric security admin and there comes a new data engineer. So I said that the data engineer needs the ability only to create the Fabric items and read all the data which is there in the existing lakehouse. Only this much is the ability which should be granted to that data engineer. So in this case, to meet all the access requirements for the new data engineer, what I can do is I can assign that new engineer to the workspace contributor role. Why? Because if I assign it to the member role also, they will be able to share the content. I don't want to give them share access as well. So what I can do is I can assign them to the workspace contributor role. This will give them the access to modify the content in the workspace. It includes creating Fabric items also, like the lake houses, everything they can create. Contributor role will also allow them to read the data in the existing lakehouse. They will be able to read whatever data is there in the existing lakehouse. That also they will be able to read. So these are the different workspace rules which we have. This is basically how we can configure the workspace rules, we can say. Now, this is how we can configure workspace, and we have some item level permissions also. For the workspace, what you can do is click on the workspace manage access and you can enter a name or an email. You can provide which access you want to provide to the user. Do you want to give them an admin access or a member access or a contributor or a viewer access? You can choose out of this. This is how we can do it at the workspace role. For the item level permissions means these permissions will control the access to individual Fabric items within a workspace. Item permissions can be used to give a user access to one or more items within a workspace, without even adding the user to a workspace role, or it can be used with workspace rules also. Like if I do not want to add a user to a workspace role, and still I want that this user should be able to access an item within the workspace, for those purposes, I can give the item level permission. Suppose the data engineer's example, if I continue, that after a few months of having the contributor access on the workspace, the data engineer no longer needs to create any fabric items and only needs to view a single lakehouse and read the data in it. Now, since this engineer no longer needs to view all the items in the workspace, in that case, the contributor workspace rule can be removed. And the item permission on the lakehouse can be configured so that the engineer will only be able to see the lakehouse metadata and the data which is there and nothing else in the workspace. So in those cases, we choose to go with the item level permissions. Now, item permission can be shared and item permissions can be configured by clicking on the three dots of the fabric item, whichever fabric item you want to manage the permission, you have to click on the three dots of that item in the workspace, and you have to simply click on this manage permissions to manage its permission point. You will have the option to grant the people access. There will be a grant access window which will come up. This is how it will look like. You can basically grant the access to the people over there. You can select manage permissions. You can add the users, and you don't select any of the checkboxes. Like there are some additional permissions which is there. Additional permissions includes like read all SQL endpoint data, read all Apache Spark, build reports. These are some additional permissions. So if you do not select any of the checkboxes under additional permissions, the users will have read access to the lakehouse metadata. The user won't have access to the underlying data in the lakehouse in those cases. So if you want to grant the engineer the ability to read the data and not just the metadata, then you have to provide the read all SQL endpoint data or read all Apache Spark option. These things you have to configure for the user then. And this is basically how we can work with it. This is how we can grant the access, we can say. So this is how we configure the workspace and the item level permission which is there. As I said, these are the options. I'm going to show you a demo also for the same about how this can be achieved, how this can be done basically. This is how we can use the one-link data access rules also to secure the data. So if you want to secure the data access through the one-link data access rule, that is also supported over here. You can control the access to the folders and files within the lakehouse. And for that purpose, you can basically use the one-link access control which we have. You can configure the data access through the lake view of the lakehouse. This is also possible. So what we do is we have an option in the lakehouse where it says manage one-link data access preview mode. If you click on it, it will take you to this page where you can provide the control access to the folders and the files within the lakehouse. You have to create a new role over here, create a new role, create a custom role to grant the access to any specific files or any folders specific which you want to grant access to. So this is basically how we can do it.